God bless you, and thank you for joining us at Salt and Light Ministry. I'm Harold Dean Trulear, and my wife, Prophetess Brenda J. Trulear, is our leader at Salt and Light Ministry, and I'm blessed to be able to join with her in this teaching ministry, especially around issues of prophecy. Let's talk about a prophet named Samuel who had a real dilemma in 1 Samuel chapter 8 when Israel asks for a king. 1 Samuel chapter 8, it came to pass when Samuel was old that he made his sons judges over Israel. Now the name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second Abiah, and they were judges in Beersheba. And his sons walked not in his ways, but turned aside after lucre, and took bribes and perverted judgment. So let's set the scene. Samuel is a judge. What is a judge? The judges were the political leaders and religious leaders that God put in place after he brought the children of Israel through the Red Sea, through the wilderness, and then into the promised land. They were unlike other nations. Other nations had kings, other nations had queens and ruled from the top down. But Israel was not to be that way. Israel's king was Yahweh, Jehovah, the Lord God of Israel, was their king. And then he had created judges, and we have a whole book of judges, which doesn't end real well. It says, and every man did what was right in his own eyes. He had judges who were to mediate the law of God. God was the king. God made the laws, the Ten Commandments, the laws that appear in Deuteronomy. The word Deuteronomy means second law, right? Second giving of the law. And so God had set up these laws for his people to practice when they got into the promised land. And then he had set apart judges, and Samuel was the lead judge to mediate the laws of God, not to rule as a king, but to mediate the law of the king, God, Yahweh, the Lord God. And so when we come to 1 Samuel 8, people are getting a little restless with this system because they say to Samuel, you're getting old and your sons do not walk in your ways. That's what they say in verse 4 and 5. And then at the end of verse 5, they say, give us a king like other nations. Now remember, God called his people to be holy. God called his people to be separate. God called his people to be different, right? He's working through them to save the whole world, which he eventually does through Jesus Christ. But before the coming of Christ, Israel is supposed to be a bellwether to the rest of the nations on how to live and how to serve the Lord God. But look at what the people say. They say, we want a king like other nations, right? The Amorites, the Moabites, the Ammonites, the Canaanites, the Mosquitobites. Just wanted to see if you were listening. No, there's no Mosquitobite tribe. But these other nations ruled from the top down. They had a king who made the laws. And Samuel was distressed. He went to God after the people asked for a king. And he prayed, and it doesn't say what Samuel prayed. In verse 6, it says that he was displeased and he went and he prayed. And then it says in verse 7, and the Lord said unto Samuel, hearken unto the voice of the people in all that they say unto thee, for they have not rejected you, they have rejected me. When the people asked for a king, they weren't just saying, we don't like you, Samuel. We don't like your sons. Your sons are corrupt anyway. But they're saying we want a king to judge us. We want a king, just like the other nations. Now, the other nations are not the chosen people. The other nations are not the people that God delivered from Egypt, brought through the Red Sea to prove that he was a God of deliverance and to prove to the world that there was no God like him. This is the God that delivered them through all of the battles in the book of Joshua. This is the God who took care of them and rescued them in the book of Judges. This is the God who has taken this people to himself as their king. And now they're saying we want a human king. Isn't that something? God has blessed you, God has kept you. And then you take a look at somebody else and you say, I want to be like them. You take a look at somebody who doesn't know God and you get envious. I talk about that in another teaching on Psalm 73, becoming envious of the fool and considering the prosperity of the wicked. They want a king like other nations. And so Samuel goes and prays to God, and God says, listen to the people, give them a king. Be careful what you pray for. But let them know what kind of king will rule over them. Let them know the nature of the king, what kind of a king you're going to get. Now, notice that this is not tied to any particular king. This is about the office itself. When you put a person in a kingly office, right? When you start acting like a king, like you're over in charge of everything, then problems set awry. Problems are set awry. Things go wrong because the king is taking the place of God. Don't let anybody take the place of God in your life. When you look at the political order and you see people ruling and lording it over things, don't be fooled. God is still in control. But if the people want a king, if the people want someone who's going to be reckless, if the people want someone who's going to hurt people, if the people want someone who is going to disregard the laws of God and is going to implement things his own way, God says, go ahead. You want a king? But let me tell you what's going to happen. And here comes the warning through Samuel for these people that want a king. Verse 11. Samuel said to the people, "This will be the manner of the king that shall reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them for himself, for his chariots, and to be his horsemen, and some shall run before his chariots." In other words, once you get a king in power, now we've got to change the system so that your sons who used to work in your fields, your sons who used to work in your shops, your son who used to work as part of the family economy, now they're going to become like a secret service to protect the king because once you have a man in power, you have to make sure that you protect him. And so we're taking energy away from the community and putting it on maintaining the power of the king. Verse 12, he shall appoint for himself captains over thousands and captains over fifties, and will set them to ear his ground, to reap his harvest, and to make his instruments of war and instruments of his chariots. Now the king is going to take your sons, take them away from the family, take them away from their God-given responsibilities to be in covenant with God, and have them work his fields. Have them support his economy, have them do all the things that he needs including making war weapons and instruments of war and making chariots, because once you have a king, you have to have an army in place to defend the right of the king to be the king. Okay, verse 13, he will take your daughters to be confectionaries and to be cooks and to be bakers. All of the cooking and that was being done for the household. Now he's going to take your daughters and they're going to cook for him. You see, when you put somebody in power like that, all of the energy of the society now goes towards the king and not towards the people. And of course, you completely miss God because your eyes are on the king. Verse 14, he will take your fields and your vineyards and your olive yards and even the best of them and give them to his servants. That's a prophecy. That's a prophecy that's fulfilled in the story of Ahab, Jezebel, and Naboth's vineyard. That's a prophecy. Samuel is prophesying that once you get a king, he's going to take your land and use it for himself. He's going to take your land, give them to his servants, the best of your lands he's going to take. The land that God had set apart for the children of Israel. In fact, he had even in the covenant law decreed that if you fell into poverty in the year of Jubilee, your land will be restored to you. But now, instead of the land being restored to you, the land's going to be usurped by the king. And that's exactly what happens in 1 Kings 21 in the story of Naboth's vineyard. Read that when you have an opportunity. Samuel here is prophesying that the king will misuse his power to heap riches for himself. Verse 15, and he will take the tenth of your seed and of your vineyards and give to his officers and his servants. He will take your men servants and your maiden servants and your goodliest young men and take your donkeys and put them to his work. So it's going to shift the economy, God is saying to the people through Samuel. It's going to shift the economy so that everything supports the rich, everything supports the people up top, and all the work will be done by the people at the bottom. Sound familiar? It's in the book. It's in the book, 1 Samuel chapter 8. He will take a tenth of your sheep, and ye shall be his servants. And ye shall cry out in that day because of your king, which shall have chosen, and the Lord will not hear you in that day. Sad days for Israel coming up. You know, having read the Old Testament, you know how many kings abused their power, how many kings used their office for themselves. Even a good king like David, a good king like David used his office to get Bathsheba, right? He used his power to send for the woman, right? Some people talk about how Bathsheba seduced David. Well, David could have said no. David could have said no, but it's not only does he not say no, he sends for her. That's using his power. Then he orchestrates his power to have Bathsheba's husband killed. Even a man after God's own heart, sitting in that king's office, makes very evil decisions. Later on in David's life, he takes a census. His captain, the head of his army, says, David, this is not a good idea, right? You're supposed to trust God. Now, the captain of the army, he wasn't that great a guy either. He loved a good fight, but he says, David, it's not a good idea to count the people. And why was David counting the people? Censuses, censi, more than one census. A census is taken for two reasons. One, to see how many people you have for political reasons, which includes taxation, right? It's, we take census in the United States because we have a representative government, but David didn't have a representative government, right? So this is about taxation and also for war. How many men can I muster if I need to fight? So this is about bringing in the money and fighting wars. And God says, I'll take care of you financially and I'll fight your battles. But no, David goes and takes the census anyway, and you know that the penalty for that was mass carnage in Israel, right? David, even a good king, even a man after God's own heart, allowed the power to corrupt him. Beware of those who would be king, and beware of people who want a king, because these people wanted a king so badly that they ignored the warnings of God and they took for themselves a king. And so Saul was chosen to be king over Israel. We all know how that turned out. Saul was disobedient to God. He fought a battle where he was supposed to get rid of all the spoils of war, and he kept some. He even kept the king alive, and Samuel had to come and kill the king of the enemies of Israel. Saul died crazy. Saul died demented. Saul died mentally disturbed because God had rejected him as king and anointed and rose up David. David was a great king, but he had those flaws that came from abusing his power. Solomon came along, and then the kingdom divides, and you see good kings, bad kings, mostly bad kings, abuse of power to the point where God sends both Israel and Judah, the northern and the southern kingdoms, into exile so that he can work on their restoration because they wanted a king and they got a king. They wanted someone despite the fact that he would corrupt the nation. They wanted someone despite the fact that he would redirect the economy toward himself and towards those who were close to him. They wanted a king despite the fact that they were warned that their sons and their daughters would be mustered into his service to do his bidding. They wanted a king anyway. And in wanting a king, they rejected the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. They rejected the will of God for their lives as a nation. They rejected what God wanted for them. Samuel, the prophet, warned them. And in this day and age, one of the features of prophecy that we need more than ever is for someone to warn the people about the direction in which governments go, warn the people about the way in which power corrupts, warn the people about how their lives will change for the worse because they anoint a king, whether it's in the White House or whether it's in the pulpit or whether it's in the home. When you anoint anyone, to take authority that belongs only to God, bad things happen. The good news is that after 42 generations, the true king came to reign. The true king, Jesus, came humble, born in poverty, working class family. The true king came humble. Paul said that he considered equality with God not something to be grasped, but took on the form of flesh and walked our walk, lived our life, died our death, and then was raised for our justification. The true king, who's King of kings and Lord of lords, who outlasts every generation, who outlasts every election, who outlasts every nation, who outlasts every kingdom, small k. The true king will not be rejected. Though we may reject him, it does not change his status. And so, in these difficult times, prophets need to call attention to how we anoint governments to do what only God can do. We need to pay attention to how power corrupts and how Jesus, who's the true king, came humble. And we need to pay attention to the responsibility that we have to point people past Capitol Hill to Calvary's Hill, to the true king, to the true Lord, to the one who in the book of Revelation says, I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. Put your faith in him today. Prophesy when you see evil, and trust that the true king is still on the throne. God bless you.